Okay, well, welcome to Spinning Your Web, our parent session. It's wonderful to have you all here and see in the chat where you're all coming from this evening. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. As we present this evening, you are more than welcome to ask questions. I'd recommend doing that not via the chat, but rather via the Q&A on your Zoom. And we will we'll find the questions that way. If you submitted a question or two in advance on your registration form, we have those compiled. We got lots of wonderful questions, and we're going to do our best to address as many of them as we can this evening. But what I want to start, I'll introduce myself. My name is Tom Nicholas. I'm a Senior Associate Director of Admission. And I am also an alumnus of the University of Richmond. I graduated some time ago from the university and am really excited to be here with you this evening. And I'd love to introduce our Director of Admission, Michael Pina. And Michael, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Good evening. My name is Michael Pina, and I'm Director of Admission at University of Richmond. Really excited to be on this call with all of you parents that are thinking about kind of the college process. I come not just as a director of admission and somebody that has some experience working as a counselor, but the most pertinent experience, I think, is that I am the parent of two students, one who is a senior in college and one that is a sophomore in college. Two vastly different human beings, and they've been that way all their lives. And navigating it, I'm here to tell you that it happens, and to share with you some of the things that I've learned along the way that might be helpful as you're going through this journey, which is really, truly, I think, a wonderful experience.
So I hope this evening we can, like I said, address some of the questions that we've received from all of you. The focus here is to speak a little bit, perhaps to some of your questions about how you can support your students during this admission process, but also to speak a little bit about how the University of Richmond is able to support your students and will be able to support your students should they become spiders. I've gone through all of the questions that we received in advance, and I'm going to start with some of those, and Michael and I will kind of popcorn style answer those questions. I went through them in advance, and I kind of grouped them into categories to kind of get a sense of what is on people's minds. And I would say that the number one thing that we got questions about regarding how Richmond supports our students were questions about advising. So questions about, we had a number of questions about selecting a major and what sort of advising students receive in that process at the university. A lot of questions about sort of when students arrive, do they get an advisor? Is it the same advisor for 4 years? How does that work? So I wanted to speak, if it's okay, Michael, I'll just pop in and get the ball rolling on that one. A little bit, kind of for starters, about academic advising. So when students enroll at the university, first of all, they actually meet their advisor before they even arrive on campus. So they're paired with the advisor through our academic advising office. Typically, it's a faculty advisor, and that happens the summer before the freshman year. So students actually have a meeting, a virtual meeting or a phone call with that advisor before they register for classes for the very first time. And so it's early on that our faculty are engaging with our students. And that's reflective of Richmond's culture, which is one where students tend to have very close relationships with professors and with their faculty members. Our small class sizes and the low student to faculty ratio are really conducive for that. And so students connect to their advisor before their first year even begins. And that advisor will typically be their advisor through around the midpoint to the end of their sophomore year. And when students declare a major, which usually happens in that second semester of their sophomore year, that's when they would transition over to an advisor in their major field. Now, in some cases, that might be the same professor. There are students who will have the same advisor for 4 years. There are students who, but there are many students who will then switch. And I think that thinking back on my own experience, one of the interesting things is that I did change to an advisor in my major field after my sophomore year. But my advisor from the first 2 years actually continued to keep in touch with me and continued to serve as sort of an unofficial advisor all the way through my senior year because we had formed such a strong relationship. And so there's a really strong sort of one-on-one advising sense there. Advisors only have between 8 and 12 advisees apiece at the university, so they have plenty of time to work with those students. And the curriculum is very open to our students, and so the advising early on is really a lot of encouragement to really explore and not worry about locking into a major too quickly. That's actually the thing our advisors find they have to do more than anything else. Our students tend to come pretty ambitious and pretty ready to go, and so there's a big sort of encouragement early on to branch out and explore, and then of course working one-on-one, meeting on a regular basis to help students through their major selection process, which again typically happens toward the end of the sophomore year. Michael, do you have anything to add there? Or do you want to say anything about career advising?
I think one of the things is establishing those relationships really early on. It also allows for the student to be able to explore, because most of our students don't come knowing exactly what they want to do. And having access to the School of Arts and Sciences or the Jepson Leadership Studies and the Robbins School of Business, being able to take classes in all of those schools if they choose, and just really explore just kind of beyond high school what they're thinking about. It's great to have that advisor in the beginning, because they can plot a course that allows for change, that allows for their minds to change and to expand, before their sophomore year, as they think about maybe doing two majors or doing a major and a minor, or for those that are, maybe a little bit more planned than I was, thinking about three majors. Since they're all rigorous, while it's technically possible, I, for one, as a parent, don't start off recommending three majors, but you never know what your child's ambitions may lead to. So,
absolutely. I think on the career side as well, and there were a couple of questions about career advising at the university. We have a separate career development office, our Office of Alumni and Career Services. And they are open to students beginning the first year. And actually, one of their real points of pride as a career services office is that between 80 and 90% of freshmen at the university, first-year students, will engage with career services in some way. And that's not necessarily because students are thinking to do that, but because they do such a great job of reaching out to students and getting students thinking early on about not just career paths, but thinking about what are the sorts of experiences that they might pursue in college during their college years, even before they've declared a major, to start thinking about aptitudes and career matches and skill sets and those sorts of things. To start thinking about the way that the classes that they're taking that are really interesting to them and the majors that they're thinking about maybe starting to pursue, to be thinking early on about how those things tie into future job searches and things of that nature. And so they have a lot of great programming, and students find that it's really easy to connect with career advisors early on. I think one of the big things that you've probably heard about, the Richmond Guarantee, every student at the university being guaranteed summer funding for at least one summer, either internship or research project. That's something that we guarantee up to $4,000 for every student. And as a result of that, and that can be any summer. And so as a result of that, we often have students even as early as their first or second year thinking about, what might I do with some of the summer funding? What are some, internship types of experiences that I might pursue? And receiving that sort of support and guidance. I think our career advisors do a phenomenal job of, and this ties into some questions that we got as well about internships. We have a lot of amazing internship programming at the university. One of the things that we are really thoughtful about doing, though, is not we don't have internship pipelines, right? We don't have set internship slots that we put students into. Our career services office is really really focused on helping students learn how to search for internships, how to secure internship opportunities, because they're going to have to do that after they graduate, well, before they graduate, when they look for jobs, but throughout their lives. It's an important skill set to learn. And so they come alongside and partner with students in that internship search process. And they do resume workshops, and they do mock interviews, and they do cover letter workshops, and all sorts of networking opportunities, and job fairs and career fairs and internship fairs held throughout the year. But they really work as partners with our students in that.
And I think just building there were a couple of things that popped up in the chat. And so I think the short answer is yes, it's safe to say that the outreach happens early in their freshman and sophomore year. And to the idea of being accessible, the students aren't a number. What I'm really impressed with is when I speak with members of the Career Counseling Office and the Career Services Office, they know who the students are. And I say, oh, I heard about this student doing this internship. And they can tell you a little bit more about the background of what happened. The other part that I think is really important, the students may not at first blush be thinking about what the outcomes are going to be when they've been at the University of Richmond for 4 years. But by having that early engagement in the classroom with the advisors, with the career services, with the ideas for internships and volunteer opportunities, and with the Richmond Guarantee, we're really happy to say that it would be a rare thing for a student not to have a job or a graduate school opportunity within 6 months. In fact, to the tune of 94%. And so we're really proud of that, not because of the number, but because each spider gets a chance to land somewhere within the web and then launch kind of their career towards a life of purpose that they're building from what they've learned here at the University of Richmond. So I think I killed two birds in the Q&A with that one stone. And if I didn't, then do a follow-up question for us.
Sounds good. I think thinking back on my own experience as well, when you speak to Richmond alumni over the years, whether they graduated last year, whether they graduated 70 years ago, one of the common threads, even though Richmond as an institution has changed dramatically over those many decades, one of the constant threads that you will hear is how amazing students' professors are or were, and how those individual relationships with faculty really transformed Richmond students' lives, and how those relationships carried beyond their college years. I mean, when my friends who are alumni come back into town, and visit or are around for homecoming or for alumni reunion weekend, they're seeking out their professors. They're grabbing coffee with faculty members who are wanting to catch up to them from 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that's kind of the hallmark of the Richmond experience, is those close relationships that you form with professors and with mentors, for sure. We got a lot of questions about orientation and sort of that transition into college. So there were some questions about what we do to sort of help first year students acclimate to life on campus. Some questions about particularly maybe how we do that in light of something like COVID, when opportunities are maybe a little bit more limited. There were some good questions about both academically and socially how we help students sort of transition into their collegiate experience at Richmond. Do you want to start on that one, Michael, or do you want me to dive in?
Okay, I'm going to jump in a little bit, because I think one of the things is our students are living through something that none of us have been able to live through, which is a global pandemic, and be educated. And so what that's challenged us to do, because we know that human connection is important, is to be creative about the way that we create that engagement for students when they're coming in. We held a full pre-orientation program this year. And the way that we're able to do that is that we are creative about making smaller groups, making sure that we have more hands on deck for that, and we create smaller cohorts that interact with each other. The other thing that we can talk a little bit about is every student now takes a URL 100 class, 100 level class. And that takes your pre-orientation, that takes you into the year where it's great to be a university with all these resources, but having people that work at the university also reaching out to students and reminding them of where they are and how to take advantage of them throughout their time transitioning into the school is something that's really important. We're thinking about that orientation as one of the pillars of thinking about the well-being and health of our students. And they're thinking about that too. So it's really a symbiotic relationship where we're reaching out to them, but they're also reaching out to us for that type of help. Where would you build from there, Tom?
I think that's spot on. I think that, all things considered, Richmond was pretty well positioned to probably as best positioned as possible to sort of take on the challenge of COVID orientation. We were in person last year, and then 90% of our students, 95% of our students were on campus, and so they did an amazing job, and it was a challenge in many ways, but to hit on, I guess, thinking about this year and then moving forward, I think that thinking there were a few questions in there about sort of beyond just orientation. So of course Richmond has a really strong orientation program. Most colleges have sort of at least a few days. Ours takes place right before the fall semester begins. So first year students move in on a Wednesday, before classes begin the following Monday, and there's sort of a 5-day orientation period. But there are a lot of really neat opportunities beyond that, and I think there actually may be one or two questions that mentioned some of these by name. So some of you all have done your homework and done your research in advance. But Roadmap to Success is a great program that begins as a pre-orientation program for students who are wanting a little bit more time, a couple extra days at the very beginning, to sort of adapt to living on campus, and who want to sort of be part of it's sort of a cohort model that lasts through their first year. Similarly, the Richmond Endeavor program is another really excellent first year program that sort of transcends just those 5 days of orientation. Endeavor is actually a living learning program. So we are working our way up to, within the next year or two, we'll be up to, I think it's either 10 or 12 first year living learning communities as part of the Endeavor program. And students live together around a common area of interest. They actually take a class together in that area, with a professor who then serves as an advisor to their hall. So there's some co-curricular programming that goes on around that as well. The students, we just debuted that 2 or 3 years ago, and the students who have taken part in that program really love it, and find that it's a wonderful way to sort of acclimate and settle in to collegiate life. So those are two additional programs that I would highlight that I think we have several other pre-orientation programs as well. There's an outdoor backpacking program. There's a multicultural pre-orientation program. So there's a number of opportunities there for students on that front end. Michael, you mentioned well-being as well, and I think that that's another area where we've gotten a number of questions this evening. We had some questions about counseling. We had some questions about how we support students' mental health, and how we support their more general well-being. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Okay. Yes, I'd love to talk a little bit about that. And just like when you're looking at the investment that we made into the Wellness Center, you're looking at a tiered approach to the well-being for students that really meets them where they are. So we can talk about some really exciting things for students, like having a meditation rooms and pods and kind of a reflexology welcome center. We can talk about the kitchen where they're learning how to cook healthily in their dorms or take advantage of different eating opportunities there. We can talk about a Himalayan salt room and massage and workout and a workout facility and yoga studios, and those things that you look at as kind of, sometimes you look at them as bells and whistles, but we look at them as one layer of just really kind of connecting students to the campus. And then when you think about the idea of counseling, as we mentioned before, the students are going through a time that's unlike any other. And even before COVID hit, mental health is something that was on our mind, and taking care of students' well-being. So with our counseling center, which is on the top floor, every student has access to that. And whether it's something where it's kind of a one-off, they need to talk about something like in my kids' lives, being able to talk about being homesick, with somebody before that coming there, that was something that's really important. And then there are sometimes students that might need to be met a different way, where they need ongoing therapy and counseling sessions, and they can also do that with a counseling center. Before they ever come to that center, you're also looking at a residential life program and 2 deans in residential life where they have some contact with what's going on in the dorms and resident advisors and those layers of support for students. So the students can outreach, they can go through their daily lives thinking about wellness. It's part of the You Are Well 100 classroom. There's a professor here, and I'm really fascinated by this, that really teaches mindfulness and talks about that and runs those kinds of seminars with students. And I think that all those things combined allows for the student across the diaspora to be met where they are and to really be able to reflect and think about their health as they're going through a rigorous and really promising and fun experience of being educated both in and out of the classroom. That's where I'd start. Now, you're an alumnus, so build on that.
I mean, I think a lot of it, not to be overly redundant, but a lot of it, I feel like, ties back into some of the things we've already said, right? So I think, like to your point, we have this great residence life system that supports students and engages students. Part of looking out for our students' well-being are these really close relationships that they form with their professors and with their advisors, who are people who are checking in on you and taking care of you. I always love to share this anecdote from my first year. It was the fall of my freshman year, and my roommate got really sick, got an awful case of the flu, and completely overslept his 8 a.m. international relations class, and emailed the professor after he woke up later to say, "Oh my gosh, so sorry that I missed class." And around noon that day, we got a call in our dorm room. I answered the phone, and it was his international relations prof, who was at the end of the door of the dorm, with a bucket of homemade chicken noodle soup that he had gone home and grabbed out of the freezer and brought over for my roommate, knowing that he wasn't feeling well. And I think that's reflective of the kind of care that the community has for our students. It really is a place where students are watched out for and cared for. And I think the Wellbeing Center, this brand new facility we just opened, is really just the latest sort of development for Richmond in that regard. Let's talk a little bit from there about, I think there was a question about, oh, good. I'm seeing someone's commenting on the Wellness Center and how amazing it is. Good. I'm glad some of you have gotten the opportunity to see that. Someone asked in the Q&A, sort of along similar lines, how do diverse students from different backgrounds feel supported at Richmond? Is that something that you want to speak to, Michael?
Sure. I'd love to talk a little bit about that. There's a couple of ways when I think about that answer. I think about, you can talk about having a 29% multicultural population from domestic students of color. But then once they get to campus, how do we help to create that sense of belonging? And I think part of the epicenter of that effort would center around our Student Center for Equity and Inclusion. And there's a new building and center that's built that's directly in the middle of the campus. And there's a group of student organizations, as well as affinity groups, professor support, peer support, in all sorts of ways that students are welcomed. Tom mentioned earlier that there's a multicultural student orientation program, and there's some introduction to finding those places. And when I think candidly about it, the way that we're made to be a better institution is by welcoming people from around the world and from around the country with diverse backgrounds and different experiences. The way that we're able to actualize that is by making sure that everyone's business is to make everyone feel welcome and be a part of that. Part of that feeling welcome also is having tough discussions about what's going on in the world around us, and even here in the city of Richmond. And we're a campus where we want our students to have those discussions with our professors and with our administration. When I think about that, I think about we have a burial ground on campus, an Indian burial ground on campus, and we had to really think about how we were going to honor that. And that was a collaboration of really thinking about the Indian population here, thinking about their professors and their research, and learning about our history and doing that. We continue to have those discussions on campus, and I think by talking and having that dialogue about people's real feelings and intellectual aspirations and understanding. We're able to create that sense of belonging, even when people don't agree, because we can disagree without being disagreeable here at the University of Richmond. And I think that's a really fertile ground for learning and problem solving and living lives of purpose. And if there are more specific questions, I'm happy to get into them because I love it.
Great. So a couple of quick ones that we can maybe knock out right here in a row. We have a question about the incoming freshman class number and whether it was reduced this year due to deferrals from last year's class during COVID. And the short answer to that question is no. We brought in a freshman class. Actually, it came in a little bit larger than we typically see, just a touch. But no, we didn't reduce the size of the class at all. We had a slightly higher number of deferrals from COVID than we would typically see, somewhere on the order of, I want to say 20 or 25 deferrals as a result of COVID, where in a typical year we might see 5, 10 deferrals year to year. And I think that relatively low rate of deferrals was a reflection of, during the 2020-21 year, the type of experience that we were able to provide students, which, as I mentioned earlier, was, students had a remote option, but we were able to be, because of our smaller size and because of the resources that we're fortunate to have, we were able to be fully in person for that academic year. And so we didn't see too many students choose to put off a year because of that. And so it didn't really impact admission for this year, and nor do we anticipate it impacting the size of our incoming class in years to come. Sandra had a question about whether most students live on campus all 4 years, and the answer to that question is yes. By the time you get to senior year, 92% of students are still choosing to live on campus, and that's entirely by choice. It's not required, but there's a really strong sense of community on campus, and we have great housing options. Students in their junior and senior years are often living in either apartment or townhouse style living on campus, and so we see most students choosing to remain on campus all four years. Got a question here about applying separately. We mentioned earlier sort of declaring majors and how that typically happens at the end of the sophomore year. Got a question about applying separately to the business school. And this applies, this is a good question, I'll broaden it a little bit to all of our schools. Students as seniors in high school, your students don't need to apply separately to any of our majors or schools this year. Students apply to the University of Richmond. They are admitted to the University of Richmond. And when they arrive on campus for their first year, they have introductory coursework across all 3 of our undergraduate schools: the School of Arts and Sciences, the Robbins School of Business, and the Jepson School of Leadership Studies is all open to them. So they can begin pursuing coursework in any of the schools they choose. Most of our general education curriculum falls in the School of Arts and Sciences, and that is technically students' home, academic home, when they arrive on campus. But students can begin taking business coursework and leadership coursework starting their first semester. There's no separate application process for the business school. There are a couple of minimum criteria that students need to meet at the midpoint of their sophomore year, which you can find on the business school's website. There's a minimum GPA requirement and a curriculum requirement. They have to have taken at least, there are, I think, three core courses, 2 of which are in the business school that they have to have taken by that point in time. But anyone who meets those criteria is able to declare a major in the Robbins School of Business. So there's no separate application process. For the leadership school, there is a secondary application process. You have to have taken at least one of the 2 introductory courses during your first 3 semesters in order to apply, which again makes sense. It gives students the chance to explore what the leadership school is offering before they choose whether or not to apply there. And it tends not to be hyper selective. It tends to be a more self-selecting population. I was just at a session last week with the associate dean of the leadership school who oversees the admission process, and she said that for this year's class, they had, I think, 85 students in the class, and they had maybe around 120 applicants for that. So that's how that works. At Richmond. I really want to answer some more questions here. I'm going to comb through them for just a moment. While we're on it, though, the other question that we got a good bit of traction on before the session began were a number of questions we had about study abroad. And I'm wondering, Michael, if you wanted to touch at all on study abroad options, how students are supported in that process, and what that looks like academically and socially.
Well, I think it's to start with having 2/3 of the students do at least one study abroad option is an important marker of quality and commitment to a global education. And then you build on that, nearly 1/3 of the students will study abroad more than once. It's something where we think that it's part of the core experience for many of our students. We want to make it accessible. So whether you're somebody that has a major and a sequence that doesn't allow you to go for a semester, or maybe you're a Division I athlete and it crosses seasons or whatever, or you can't really decide where you want to study abroad, the University of Richmond wants to make sure that that's accessible to everybody. So it's a combination of partnerships in over 70 countries around the world, as well as faculty-led. There'll be shorter stints abroad so that you can do a 2-week session that's a faculty-led opportunity. There are grants within the School of International Relations that allows for students to, every student that studies abroad, they get a grant where they can have their own culturally immersive experience. The story that I heard that I really loved the most that talks about the student really taking charge was a student studying in South Africa. And doing his studies, he found out that there was this really big soccer tournament going on there. You guys may have heard of it. It's called the World Cup. And he used his stipend to buy World Cup tickets to go to the World Cup as part of his experience. What I've recommended to students is that they think about something that centers around food or music, because I think that is one of the windows into the souls of any culture around the world. But it really is up to the student to find out what it is that's going to make their experience enriched. If they're candidates for financial aid or receive merit scholarships, all of that financial aid also transfers to their study abroad programs. We want this program to be accessible to every student, and we're building upon that. There's another thing that I think is really important is that even during the COVID times, we put the apparatus in place to make sure that our students could, when they chose to, travel and have the safety net, the safety web of being able to get home, to get care, or to have testing in country when they needed to, if they needed to do that. Fortunately, and I'm knocking on a little bit of wood that's over here, fortunately, we haven't had anything that's made us have to use all of those safety mechanisms that we put in place. But we put them in place anyway because we're a school that has the resource to take care of our students, and we want that experience to continue. And a recent report in a recent meeting that I was in, I think we had nearly 300 students already abroad for this year. Already what we were doing pre-COVID, we're headed that way. So I think it's a really important aspect. It's one that's supported, it's one that's funded, and one that folks do. So.
I'll speak from my own experience. I spent a semester at the University of Münster in Northwest Germany and had a phenomenal experience, and came back saying what most students who spend a semester abroad say, which is, wow, I really wish I had done a full year. And I knew a few students that did a full year abroad during their junior year. But all of my financial aid and scholarship carried with me as I studied abroad. The stipend that Michael referred to helped cover some of those additional ancillary expenses. And the other thing that I always like to note is that students don't, the way that we're structured, which is that students are predominantly going through these exchange programs. We have shorter term programs, as was mentioned, some faculty-led excursions and summer programs, but more than half of our students are going to do at least a full semester as an exchange student. And with this exchange model, you're not having to take a semester off in order to go abroad. So I was a German major. It made sense for me. 3 of my courses came back and counted toward my German major, one of my courses actually came back and took care of my my field of study, general education requirement in history. And so it is the most common experience is that students are going to take at least 1 or 2 classes abroad that are going to count toward their majors back at Richmond. And what this means is that even in areas where it's a little less common to study abroad, for example, business majors, nationally speaking, don't study abroad at the same rates that students in schools of arts and sciences typically do. Students in the sciences, biology, chemistry, physics majors, don't typically study abroad at nearly as high as the rates that students in other areas do. And at Richmond, not that we don't have some deficiencies there, but those students are studying abroad at much higher rates than they do nationally, and certainly relative to other majors. And so it's a lot easier to study abroad. When you know that it's not going to take away from your academic experience. I did drop a link. There were a number of questions about the Richmond Endeavor. I dropped a link in the chat to the Endeavor website for those who are interested in seeing more about that. There was a question about the selectivity and the application process for the Endeavor program. That's that first year living and learning program. Last year we had, I want to say it was about 190 applicants for the Endeavor program, and I think they had somewhere around 150 to 160 spaces in the program. And so Richmond's a well-resourced school, and so we tend to be able to provide things to a good number of the students who want to pursue those things, and the Endeavor is no exception to that. And it's still not at its peak. Like I said, we're adding on some additional cohorts each year to the Endeavor program. So and I also know for a fact that students that our staff who oversee the program, for the small number of students who aren't able to be accommodated within the program, they're still going to look for other avenues for those students to engage and get involved. So some of those students perhaps were able to take part in the roadmap program if they weren't able to do Endeavor, and things of that nature. We had someone ask about well, I want to say, I guess we had one question about admission plans in the chat or in the Q&A.
Was that the one about, was that ED1, ED2
Yeah,
question?
ED1 and ED2. And that actually, we got a number of questions in advance on that as well. We had questions from the registration forms about early decision 1 and early decision 2, and sort of the how to select between application plans. Anything you want to shed light on that?
I really think that when a student is driving this process, I like to think that when they meet our professors and our students and they learn about us, that it becomes their first choice, and that it's something where they would think about an early decision round 1 application. It's for those people that have done their homework and know that this is a place where a university that can make them better at what they do, that we can help them explore some things that they're curious about, and that they feel like they will grow and expand just kind of their footprint for all 4 years. The way I think about the ED1 and ED2 is that sometimes for students, it takes a little bit longer for them to decide what their top choice is. And let's be honest, sometimes they have a choice that's different in their first round, and they might use the ED2. I think it's a really effective tool for really expressing that this is your number 1 choice. We're not a school that tracks demonstrated interests, but approximately 40% of our class comes through that early decision round. What I would recommend when people think about University of Richmond and applying is that they don't miss the opportunity to meet the scholarship deadline. We have 3 merit scholarships, and the December 1st is the merit scholarship deadline. That's the one where you don't want to miss that opportunity, because regardless of what your financial situation is, it's nice to be considered for a full half or third tuition scholarship where it includes tuition, room, and board. The caution that I would give parents is this. I know from being in the admissions process a couple of times, and also being a counselor where maybe 3 students in the class did not apply some form of early decision or early action. Each time, one of them was my kid. And the thing is, you want to leave that space for the child to actually really decide, because yes, there's some strategic thinking about the early decision, but the strategy only works if you're thinking about the total child and the wellness and their health and happiness and full development. So encourage them to do the homework, really take a close look at what's going on around there and what's right for your family. Have that discussion at the table. It's a really great option when the child is ready. And so only you will know that, and only they will know that. Something that's a really, I think, personal decision.
I think there was someone else added in a question about EA as well. And I think that, if students are ready and able to apply to the university by our November 1 deadline, whether that's early decision, or if Richmond is not a clear first choice, if they're not able to make that commitment through the early action plan, there are very few downsides to applying. I'll say early action. Early action is not binding. Early action allows you to find out a couple of months earlier than you otherwise would about your admission, and so there aren't really any major downsides that I can think of to applying early action, with the exception of needing to get your application in a little bit earlier. Though I would point out one thing to keep in mind there is that the November 1 deadline is an application deadline. The credentials deadline for the early action plan doesn't roll around until November 30th, which means that students have about 4 weeks after they need to submit their applications by November 1st, but they have about 4 weeks to ensure that their applications are complete. So if they need a little bit extra time to finish out their supplemental essay, or to make sure everything gets squared away with the documentation, their transcript and everything from the school, that's totally fine. That doesn't necessarily need to be a barrier to applying early action. The admission rates in those early decision pools, the binding pools, do tend to be a little bit higher than in the early action and regular rounds. It's a much smaller pool of students who are very excited about the university. The admission rates between early action and regular decision will vary a lot from year to year, and I guess I would say there that there's not, because students who may be competitive in regular decision can be deferred to regular decision if they're not admitted in early action. There's not really a downside there to applying early action either.
Okay, so Tom, I want to emphasize something that you said in the beginning, because
Please.
it's really important for the child's sanity in this process. If they apply early action by November 1, you do not need to tell the counselor that they need to expedite any of the information that's on their schedule. You do not need to do that, because it will get done, and it doesn't give the kid an advantage by doing that in our pool. So let them finish their application and feel good about that, and then trust the people that they're working with, and ask the questions that they need to, but not rush this because Michael Pina and Tom want to see this stuff early. Because we're not going to read it early. So give yourself a little grace and give them a little bit of grace, and it will work well to keep the stress level a little bit lower for the child, and maybe for you that you've heard this year.
And I'll add as well, as the person who manages, I think that's great advice. Thank you, Michael. As the person who manages our admission portal, the Spider portal, if your students haven't applied yet, they'll soon learn about the Spider portal. I would add as well that there's kind of a balancing act there. First of all, on the one hand, you need to make sure that your students are checking their portal and looking at their application checklist and making sure that everything it does arrive by that credentials deadline, which is typically 2 to 4 weeks after the application deadline for their plan. So it's important on the one hand to help them along in that and in encouraging them to do that. But on the other hand, you can also help them understand that this credentials deadline does exist. That's a little bit later. Not everything needs to be there right there at November 1st. And in fact, it can take a little while, especially around a big deadline, for us to process all of the materials that are coming in, which is to say that if you log into the Spider portal the day after you apply and your high school transcript isn't checked off yet, you don't need to go hurriedly panicked running to the school counselor to see where it is or what's wrong or why it's not there. It's probably just still being processed and will show up after a couple of days. most likely. And there's time built in there for you to check back in to make sure that things have arrived, and to ensure that they're there.
There's one more addendum that I wanted to add to that because it came up in the chat room. The question about early decision and financial aid. And so if Richmond is your first choice, we're a school that's need blind for domestic students, and we meet 100% of need. And when we say we meet 100% of need, it's really that we're looking at the formula that's most favorable to our families and providing a combination of grant and federally subsidized loans and different things depending on your situation, so that it will be the most generous package that we can give for you. That should not be a barrier for the University of Richmond because we're able to meet need and we are need blind. I say that with a lot of confidence because unless you're looking at a comparison of the different merit scholarships and you got a full merit scholarship at one school and not a full merit scholarship at the University of Richmond. Other than that, if you're talking about need-based financial aid, we are going to meet that. There's also there's a Spending the Web financial aid webinar also that they can log into. Is that right, Tom?
Yes, and that's actually part of the same portal. Yep. So if you apply for financial aid, you'll also have a financial aid checklist in your Spider. Answering a couple of questions there in the Q&A. All of our application plans have a credentials deadline that is, like I mentioned, about typically 2 to 4 weeks after the actual deadline. I'm dropping a link in the chat to our plans webpage, and you can scroll down and you can see for any of the plans, click through and see the full timeline for that plan. So for early decision 1, it's a November 15 credentials deadline. For early action, it's November 30th. We've had a number of questions in the both in advance and tonight about financial aid, and Michael, you've alluded to that a little bit. I did put a link into the chat there just because of our limited time tonight, and maybe more specifically because neither of us works in the financial aid office. I dropped a link in there to last week's Spinning Your Web session, which was with 2 folks from our financial aid office. That is recorded on YouTube. And if you have questions about how financial aid works, I would encourage you to check that out and point you to that. We had a great question in the chat about student employment on campus. And I don't know the exact percentage, but it is a significant portion of our student body that holds jobs on campus. I believe it's more than half of students at Richmond in any given year that will hold a part-time job on campus. And that's not just part of federal work study. We have students who, as part of their financial aid package, have a federal work study component. So they're working toward that federal work study piece of things. But we also have what's called our university work program, which any student can apply for. And the person in the chat was mentioning some of the maybe more coveted jobs on campus. Things like, we have students who are things like, working in that brand new wellness center. We have students who teach fitness classes and work as yoga instructors and things like that. Working in the library is actually a surprisingly coveted job because if you can make your way from shelving books up to nighttime front desk duty, you can pretty much just sit at the front desk of the library and do your classwork, do your homework, and maybe occasionally answer a question or two. But there are a variety of jobs available on campus. We employ tons of students in the Office of Admission, and as both office assistants and as tour guides, of course. And so there are a lot of opportunities for students to work on campus. There's a big job fair at the beginning of the year, every year. And then we also have some questions. Oh, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to add to that. We don't just employ students because somebody asked about the goats. We want to talk a little bit about the goats.
Yes, yes, the goats are back on campus. So we first met the goats, I think 4 or 5 years ago. They were starting to work on this eco corridor that we've developed on campus, the stream that runs off the back end of our lake and heads down into the James River. the portion of that stream that runs on our campus had not been well maintained over the years. And so we actually got a grant from the state that we used toward reclaiming that corridor, planting native species, and it's a really cool. There's a brand new path that runs through it now, and it's a very popular spot. You see a lot of students jogging through there, walking through there. We call it the eco corridor. But one of the first things that they had to do before they planted all the native species was to get rid of all the invasive species. And one of the most environmentally friendly ways of getting rid of invasive species, or just getting foliage cut down really rapidly in general without using gas-powered mowers and things like that, is to use goats. And so they brought the goats back just a week or two ago. They arrived back on campus. There are farms that lend out or rent out their goat herds, and the goats, they sort of have a pen. They sort of move it down the corridor, and the goats just do their thing and graze, and they get a lot of visitors. Students love going and checking on them. There's I'm not sure if do they have a goat cam up and running this time? I know
I didn't see the goat cam yet.
At one point there was a goat cam that you could actually, at any time you wanted, you could pop on the goat cam. I'll see if I can find it if there is one this time and drop it in the chat. But they are beloved visitors on campus. We love we love having the goats around. So yeah, really exciting times. We did get some questions about merit scholarships as well. I know that the financial aid session that I linked to in the chat there did speak about and cover merit scholarships as well. And you can find some more information there. But one thing that I would like to point out, one really important deadline to keep in mind, regardless of when your student applies, or rather, regardless of what plan your student applies under, if you want to ensure that you are being considered for every merit scholarship opportunity available, you need to make sure that you apply by the 1st of December. That's not a separate application plan. You're still applying. If you apply November 1, early action or early decision, you're good to go. If you're applying regular decision or early decision 2, all you have to do is make sure you get your application on file by the 1st of December, which is a month earlier than the January 1 deadline. And that ensures that your application is considered for the Richmond Scholars program. Richmond Scholars is sort of our flagship merit scholarship. It's 25 full ride scholarships that we award, tuition, room, and board every year. It's a highly competitive program. Last year we had around 10,000 applications for what would eventually become 25 scholars on campus. But this ties into a question earlier, or that came in advance as well, and that was the question of, Michael, you alluded to sort of financial aid packages, right? And the financial aid package, because we are need blind and meet 100% of need, your financial aid package, your need-based aid package is going to look the same whether you apply early decision or under a binding plan or a non-binding plan. Merit scholarship consideration at Richmond works the same way. You're given equal consideration for all of our merit scholarships, regardless of what plan you apply under for admission. And so early decision applicants who apply under binding plans, as long as their applications are on file by that December 1st deadline, they are given full consideration for the Richmond Scholars Program. We will also award presidential scholarships, which are 1/3 tuition in all of our rounds of admission. And students who are interested in being considered, all right, we will also award Oliver Hill scholarships, which are presidential scholars plus a little bit more to take them up to half tuition. Those are awarded by a committee of faculty across our applicant pool, across all the rounds of admission as well. So if, again, when it comes to those financial considerations with early decision, if you feel like you're going to rely on a merit scholarship in order to afford a Richmond education, early decision may not be the best decision, because you generally are going to need to commit before you find out about most merit scholarships. I'm sorry, you're going to need to enroll before you find out about most merit scholarships. But know that we do award presidential scholarships in the early rounds, and we award those across all of our rounds of admission. There are so many wonderful questions. Got a question about the merit scholarship application being separate. So I'll just tack that on as well. No, the merit application is not separate. So applying for that Richmond Scholars program that I mentioned, the December 1 deadline, no separate application, no supplemental application. It's just your standard admission application. but it needs to be on file by the 1st of December, which is how all of our early action and early decision 1 applicants are automatically considered for that particular program. And none of our other merit scholarships have separate applications, so it's just the application for admission. Someone asked about the 40% of the class coming in via an early decision plan. Is that ED1 and ED2? Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
Yep, that's both combined into that 40% figure, and that figure will vary a little bit from year to year. Usually, it's around 38 to 40% of the class that will come in through one of the binding plans. We have so many more great questions in the Q&A that, unfortunately, given our time here, we're not going to be able to get to this evening. We will do our best to follow up on some of these, and I'd also encourage you to reach out to our office, reach out to the admission representative for your area if you'd like to follow up on any of these questions. I think Michael and I both wish that we could spend the next couple of hours sitting here and answering questions, but we are coming up on our time here. We want to be respectful of that.
Hey, Tom, I want to give, there's one there that asked about if students stay on campus or if we're like a commuter campus, and if the school plans events for people. Well, what I'd like to say is that we have 90% living on campus. I think it's 92%, and they choose to live on campus because it's a residential community, and there's nearly 200 clubs and organizations on campus. And no, the school doesn't plan all the activities for them. The kids take charge in their organizations, and they plan things, in collaboration. But there's also events that happen at the school that the school sponsors that might include lectures or different sorts of events on campus. So there's funding for the students to be creative. There's stuff that's intellectual that the school will plan, but then there's so much more activity that students are planning. Remember, we're a Division I sports school as well, so students will also attend sports events and support their classmates. They like being here. It's a beautiful campus. You can see a couple of shots in the background. Those are not Photoshopped. Those are actual shots of our campus. And so we're not a commuter campus. The kids are here on the weekends.
For sure. Well, as we wrap up here, then maybe Michael, I guess as sort of a closing thought, we've touched on this a couple of times throughout, but what are some things, or a thing, or some things that you think parents can be doing? I mean, especially November 1 is just 9 days away. That's the first big deadline for a lot of colleges. What are some ways that parents can be supporting their students, encouraging their students right now as part of the application process?
Okay. Well, the funny thing is box breathe a little bit. First thing, take a deep breath, because it is a little bit of pressure. Your child will feel some pressure if they're hitting that deadline. Be there and be supportive in a way where you're listening. And if you really have something to say about their process, before you say it, a good way to think about whether or not it's going to have the impact that you need is to use what I call the weight. It's like, why am I talking? And then if you feel like it's something that's going to be really helpful for them to make that decision, then do it. But be comfortable sitting with the silence with them and not solving the problem, because they're capable. They'll appreciate you for it later, even if they yell at you now a little bit.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you all so much for attending this evening. Hopefully this was useful to you, was helpful to you. You can follow up again with the admission office anytime. We would love to get as many of your questions answered as we possibly can. But this, I will say, if you want to go back and watch any of this again, the recording from this session should be up on the YouTube channel probably early next week, and you can take a look at it there. But in the meantime, we want to wish you all the best. Wish you and your students all the best, particularly as those application deadlines start to come up. And we look forward to hearing from you again in the future. Take care and have a great evening.
Thank you all. Bye.